Take a slow breath. There is no rush tonight. There never really can be, because the sea has never been particularly interested in anyone's schedule. Long before clocks, timetables, and anxious meetings existed, the tide had already decided when things would happen, and humanity, with impressive confidence and very little leverage, simply learned to pretend it was in charge. Tonight, you have volunteered, perhaps unwisely, to stand the midnight watch aboard a 19th century naval vessel. It sounds wonderfully adventurous when written in a history book. It feels considerably less glamorous when you arrive. The harbour is almost silent. Not truly silent, of course. Water is incapable of remaining completely still. It whispers against stone docks with patient determination. Gentle waves nudge rows of anchored ships, producing slow wooden creaks that seem less like noises and more like the old bones of the harbour stretching after a long day. Somewhere in the darkness, a buoy rings softly. Farther away, another answers. The sound drifts through the cool night air, separated by long moments of peaceful emptiness. The moon hangs above everything with quiet authority, turning the water into polished silver. The masts of dozens of ships stand like a forest without leaves, each one gently swaying, drawing delicate lines across the stars. You walk along the dock. Your boots strike weathered planks worn smooth by thousands of sailors who came before you, each carrying his own bundle of worries, ambitions, regrets, or simply tomorrow's breakfast tucked beneath one arm. The wood smells of salt, of tar, of damp rope, of old rain that never quite left. Everything here seems to carry several centuries inside it. Even the air feels seasoned. Ahead waits your ship. She rises above the harbour with quiet confidence, broad-sided and enormous. Every timber announcing that someone once believed the safest way to cross an unpredictable ocean was to build an exceptionally large wooden box, fill it with hundreds of people, several dozen cannons, mountains of gunpowder, and then deliberately sail into storms. History is full of optimism. The hull is black beneath the moonlight, interrupted by neat rows of closed gun ports that resemble sleepy eyes. Above them rises an impossible maze of spars, masts, yards, blocks, pulleys, and enough rope to convince you that no one aboard ever truly knew where every line actually went. Officially, every rope had a purpose. Unofficially, if one sailor quietly claimed that line number 47 controlled the moon itself, there is a reasonable chance nobody would have argued immediately. You reach the gangway. It rocks ever so slightly beneath your feet. The sailor standing guard nods with the calm expression of someone who has accepted that this enormous floating construction occasionally attempts to throw people into the sea. You climb. Each step creaks. The timber beneath your boots is thick, heavy oak that has crossed forests before it ever crossed oceans. It bears countless scratches from cargo, boots, cannon wheels, dropped tools, and generations of exhausted sailors who probably promised themselves they would choose a much quieter profession just as soon as they survived this voyage. Many never did. Fortunately for tonight's purposes, we will dwell only on the quieter details. At the top of the gangway, you pause. The deck stretches before you. It is surprisingly clean, not luxurious, simply disciplined. Everything has its place. Coils of rope rest neatly against rails. Lanterns glow behind thick glass, their light softened by careful shades so it will not blind sailors adjusting to darkness. The faint smell of whale oil mingles with salt air. Somewhere overhead, canvas shifts almost imperceptibly. Even while anchored, the ship never truly stops moving. She breathes, she settles, she sighs against the tide with slow, sleepy motions. You discover this immediately as the deck gently tilts beneath you. Your legs attempt to negotiate with gravity. Gravity declines the discussion. You realize with admirable speed that standing upright aboard a wooden warship is less a skill and more an ongoing diplomatic agreement between your feet and the ocean. Experienced sailors hardly notice. You, meanwhile, have already developed a deep appreciation for railings. The deck itself tells stories. Every plank has expanded and contracted through countless winters and summers. Tiny seams run between them, packed with tarred fibers that keep seawater from inviting itself indoors. It is remarkable craftsmanship. It is also maintenance that never ends. Wood swells, wood shrinks, wood cracks. The sea patiently waits. Naval architecture in the 19th century often resembled an endless conversation between determined shipbuilders and an ocean politely explaining why it disagreed. The ocean usually made persuasive arguments. Above you, the rigging disappears into darkness. Hundreds upon hundreds of lines stretch upward until they dissolve into the night sky. Looking at them from below feels strangely similar to standing beneath the branches of an ancient forest. Only these branches occasionally required sailors to climb them during storms while balancing several stories above freezing water. As employment opportunities go, it possessed room for personal growth, mostly vertical. The breeze brushes your face. It carries hints of open water beyond the harbour entrance. You can almost imagine distant waves rolling endlessly beneath the moon, rising and falling long before anyone aboard this ship was born, and continuing long after every name in the ship's log has faded into history. That thought is oddly comforting. The sea is patient. People are temporary. Timber lasts longer than expected. Paper lasts less. Rope somehow manages both. A bell rings somewhere aboard. Not urgently. Just once. Clear. Measured. Time aboard ship belongs to bells. Hours are divided differently here. Sleep arrives differently. Meals arrive differently. Even the night itself has been carefully organized into watches, because someone eventually looked at endless darkness and concluded that what it truly needed was additional scheduling. The midnight watch. Your watch. It begins while most sensible people are asleep. This seems slightly unfair. Unfortunately, fairness has never appeared among the Royal Navy's official supplies. You glance toward the stern. The officers' quarters remain dark behind polished windows. Forward lies the working heart of the ship. Everything smells faintly alive. Oak, pitch, salt, canvas, tar, lantern smoke, old iron, fresh seawater, human effort. No single scent dominates. Together, they become something unmistakable. The smell of a ship preparing, always preparing. Even while perfectly still, you rest one hand against the rail. The wood feels cool beneath your fingers, smooth in places, rough in others. Tiny grooves mark decades of use. Thousands of hands have rested exactly where yours rests now. Some belong to nervous first-timers. Some belong to seasoned sailors who could identify approaching weather simply by listening to the rigging hum. Others probably wondered, quietly and without witnesses, why every adventure eventually involved damp socks. History rarely records those thoughts. Perhaps it should. The harbour grows quieter still. The city beyond the waterfront has settled into sleep. Only scattered lights remain, reflected across calm water in trembling ribbons of gold. The world seems smaller now. Just the moon, the tide, the lanterns, and this immense wooden vessel waiting patiently for another night. Soon enough, your duties will begin. But first, there is one more place to visit. Before anyone can stand the midnight watch, they must understand where the crew steals whatever sleep they can between bells. So, with one last glance across the moonlit harbour, you turn toward a narrow companionway. A lantern hangs beside it, glowing softly. The steps disappear into warm darkness below. The sounds of the harbour begin to fade behind you. The ship's quieter heartbeat waits beneath the deck. And, very slowly, you begin to descend. The lantern sways gently above your head as you step farther below deck. Its small circle of warm light follows you only a short distance before darkness quietly gathers again beyond its reach. The air changes almost immediately. Up on deck, the night had smelled of salt, tar, and cool sea breeze. Down here, the ship has been keeping secrets. The scent is not unpleasant in the dramatic way one might expect. It is simply persistent. Layer upon layer of ordinary smells have settled together over months and years until they have become inseparable. Salt soaked into timber, tar warming gently inside the planks, wool that has never been completely dry, leather boots, lantern smoke, a faint trace of vinegar used for cleaning, the unmistakable aroma of several hundred human beings sharing what is, when viewed objectively, a rather ambitious amount of personal space. Somewhere beneath all of that lingers the quiet reminder that many 19th century ships also carried livestock during long voyages. A chicken, unlike a sailor, has absolutely no interest in naval discipline. Neither, it turns out, does a goat. History often celebrates admirals. It spends considerably less time discussing the emotional resilience required to sleep beside mildly opinionated poultry. The deck above creaks softly. The sound travels through the massive oak beams, like the slow breathing of some enormous sleeping animal. Every movement of the tide gently shifts the ship. Nothing remains perfectly still. The lantern swings, the shadows sway. Even your own balance adjusts almost without your noticing. It is strangely comforting. Eventually, rows of hammocks stretch through the dimness from beam to beam, suspended by ropes tied with practiced precision. They hang astonishingly close together. From a distance, they resemble quiet cocoons floating in darkness. Each hammock belongs to one sailor, not because comfort demanded it, because efficiency did. Wooden ships had a remarkable ability to fit one more person into spaces that already appeared entirely full. Some naval architect somewhere undoubtedly looked at these crowded sleeping quarters and confidently declared there was still enough room for another dozen men. The sailors almost certainly disagreed. The architect was safely on shore. You reach out and touch one hammock gently. The coarse canvas feels sturdy beneath your fingers. Simple, practical, entirely unconcerned with luxury. Inside rests a thin blanket, folded clothing, and perhaps one or two treasured belongings tucked carefully beneath the fabric. A small keepsake, a letter, a carved pipe, a worn Bible, a smooth stone collected from a distant coastline. Tiny reminders that every sailor here carried an entire life inside remarkably little space. Privacy exists only in memory. The ship belongs to everyone, and therefore to no one. Finding your own hammock requires surprisingly little effort. Finding your way into it gracefully is another matter entirely. You sit carefully. The hammock immediately begins swinging, not dramatically, just enough to inform you that balance remains a collaborative project. You attempt to settle your weight. The hammock responds by rotating very slightly. Apparently, even sleep aboard a naval vessel involves negotiation. Eventually, you discover the technique known to generations of sailors. Move slowly, accept defeat, allow gravity to make most of the decisions. It is oddly effective. Once you stop resisting, the gentle motion becomes almost soothing. The ship rocks. Your hammock answers. The rhythm repeats. Back and forth, like breathing. Outside, waves continue their endless conversation with the hull. The water brushes against thick oak planks in long, whispering strokes. Occasionally, another anchored ship answers with its own distant creak, the sound drifting softly through the harbour before disappearing again into the night. Somewhere nearby, someone snores, not aggressively, merely with quiet confidence. Another sailor shifts in his hammock, producing a gentle rustle of canvas and wool. A cough echoes briefly before fading away. Then stillness returns. It becomes clear why sailors learned to sleep almost anywhere. Their opportunities were limited. Their schedules cared very little about personal preference. The day aboard ship is not divided according to human comfort. It is divided according to watches. 4 hours here, 4 hours there. Midnight arrives whether anyone feels rested or not. One suspects the inventors of naval watch schedules were deeply suspicious of uninterrupted sleep. Perhaps they believed too much comfort encouraged dangerous optimism. Or perhaps the sea itself simply refused to cooperate with ordinary bedtime routines. Either way, maritime law demonstrates remarkable dedication to punctual exhaustion. You close your eyes. The hammock continues its slow pendulum. The darkness becomes complete. Time loses its sharp edges. Minutes soften. Thoughts drift apart. The steady creaking of timber blends with the distant lap of water until individual sounds no longer matter. Everything becomes one continuous, peaceful murmur. You begin to understand why sailors often describe the ship as alive. Not because it moved, because it breathed. Its ribs flexed, its joints sighed, its wooden heart beat quietly beneath every footstep. For one brief moment, despite the crowded quarters and questionable ventilation, despite the layers of wool and damp canvas, despite the lingering philosophical disagreement between fresh air and enclosed spaces, there is peace. Then a bell. Clear, measured, unmistakable. One strike, then another. The sound travels effortlessly through every beam of the ship. No shouting, no panic, simply certainty. Midnight. The watch changes. Human sleep, having barely introduced itself, is politely informed that its services are no longer required. Around you, the hammocks begin to stir. Not quickly. Experience has taught everyone that unnecessary speed only creates unnecessary collisions. Canvas rustles softly. Someone quietly yawns. Another mutters something that history fortunately chose not to preserve. The ship wakes without ever becoming loud. You open your eyes. Darkness greets you with complete professionalism. Only a handful of lanterns burn low along the passageways, leaving everything painted in soft amber and deep shadow. For several wonderfully confusing seconds, you have absolutely no idea where your arms are. The hammock has wrapped itself around you with remarkable enthusiasm. Escaping it requires patience. A certain amount of dignity is inevitably surrendered. You finally place both feet onto the gently shifting deck. The wood feels cool through your stockings. Your balance takes a moment to remember where it left off. Nearby, sailors quietly dress with practiced movements, requiring almost no light. They know every button by memory, every buckle, every fold of cloth. You, meanwhile, discover that clothing has become noticeably damper than when you removed it. Not soaked, simply maritime. The sea has an extraordinary ability to distribute moisture equally among all possessions without ever asking permission. Your wool shirt feels heavy. Your trousers retain the night's coolness. Your thick stockings appear to have formed a long-term relationship with humidity. Then comes the coat, dense wool, practical, warm eventually. At the present moment, it possesses approximately the emotional warmth of refrigerated moss. You pull it on anyway. The fabric settles across your shoulders with quiet reluctance. Within a few minutes, your own body heat will persuade it to cooperate. For now, both of you simply endure the introduction. Around the room, belts are tightened, scarves adjusted, boots pulled firmly into place. No one wastes words. The routine has happened thousands of times before. It will happen thousands more. Outside, the bell has already faded back into silence. The sea waits patiently above. You draw one slow breath of the warm, crowded air below deck, carrying with it salt, timber, wool, tar, livestock, humanity, and just enough fresh air to encourage cautious optimism. Then you turn toward the companionway. The narrow ladder rises above you, disappearing into darkness where a pale ribbon of moonlight spills through the open hatch. One hand finds the smooth wooden rail. Your boot settles carefully onto the first step. Above waits the cool night air. Above waits the great silent deck beneath the stars. Above waits the long stretch between midnight and 4 in the morning, where the ship never truly sleeps. And now, neither will you. Slowly, steadily, you begin to climb. The final step carries you through the hatch, and the night greets you all at once. The air is cooler here. It slips quietly beneath the collar of your damp wool coat and brushes against your face with gentle determination. After the warm closeness below deck, the breeze feels wonderfully clean, carrying only salt, distant water, and the faint scent of tar warming beneath the lanterns. You pause for a moment. Your eyes need time. Below deck, darkness had been softened by lantern light. Up here, the moon has become the only generous source of illumination. It paints the deck in silver and shadow, leaving every rope, mast, and spar outlined with quiet precision. Nothing seems hurried. Nothing seems awake. Yet every part of the ship remains quietly occupied. The rigging murmurs overhead. Blocks knock together with soft wooden clicks. Canvas shifts almost imperceptibly. The hull answers every passing swell with a patient creak that travels from bow to stern like a slow conversation among old friends. The ship has discovered thousands of tiny sounds over the years. Tonight, it performs them all. You step carefully across the deck. The planks glisten faintly with moisture. Not enough to trouble experienced sailors, just enough to remind newcomers that gravity has accepted temporary employment with the sea. Each footstep lands deliberately. Your boots produce little more than a muted thump against thick oak. There is no reason to hurry. The watch has only just begun. There are still several hours before dawn considers making an appearance. The thought arrives with remarkable calm. Several hours, standing, watching, listening, looking into darkness. The sea has devised many methods of testing human patience. This one is surprisingly elegant. A quiet voice greets you. A sailor finishing his own duties nods toward the rail before disappearing below without unnecessary ceremony. The exchange requires almost no words. Everyone aboard understands that conversation grows smaller during the midnight watch. Voices feel too loud. Even whispers seem reluctant to disturb the sleeping ocean. You take your place near the weather rail. Ahead lies nothing but open water. The harbour is now far behind. At some point, while you rested below deck, the ship quietly slipped its moorings and eased into the dark sea beyond the safety of land. The shoreline has dissolved into a thin ribbon of darkness. Ahead, only horizon, only stars, only the endless breathing of the ocean. Moonlight stretches across the waves in a silver path that never quite reaches the ship. Every gentle swell catches the light for an instant before sinking back into darkness. It is impossible to tell where the sea ends and the sky begins. The horizon becomes suggestion rather than certainty. Your task sounds wonderfully simple. Remain alert. Watch for danger. Report anything unusual. Simple instructions often conceal remarkable complexity. For example, what exactly qualifies as unusual in complete darkness? You look. The sea looks back with perfect innocence. A wave rises. Another follows. Clouds drift slowly across unfamiliar constellations. The mast sways almost imperceptibly overhead. Nothing changes. Then everything changes. Only because another wave arrives. This pattern continues, minute after minute. Your attention begins by examining every shadow with determined seriousness. Perhaps that darker patch is another vessel. Perhaps that ripple conceals floating wreckage. Perhaps... No, it's another wave. 5 minutes later, another suspicious shape appears. Surely this one? Also a wave. The human brain is remarkably creative when provided with insufficient information. Presented with darkness, it enthusiastically begins inventing possibilities. A drifting barrel becomes a pirate. A distant cloud briefly resembles an island. The moon hides behind thin mist, and for one thoughtful moment, you become entirely convinced that the sea itself has quietly moved somewhere else. It has not. Fortunately, officers aboard 19th century ships often encourage this constant vigilance. Quite reasonably, they preferred discovering dangers before the dangers discovered them. Unfortunately, they also inherited a generous collection of maritime superstitions. Whistling on deck might summon unwanted winds. Beginning certain tasks on particular days invited dreadful luck. A bird landing upon the rigging could represent anything from good fortune to imminent disaster, depending largely upon which sailor happened to be explaining it. The sea encouraged practical thinking. It also quietly allowed extraordinary imagination to flourish. After all, when people spend months surrounded by endless water, the mind naturally begins decorating the emptiness. One officer might blame an unexpected storm on careless whistling. Another might blame poor navigation upon someone mentioning rabbits at the wrong moment. The rabbits themselves remained entirely unaware of their alleged influence over naval operations. This was probably for the best. You continue watching. The ship rises gently, falls gently, rises again. The movement becomes almost invisible after a while. Your body quietly learns the rhythm. Your knees bend without conscious thought. Your balance adjusts before your mind notices. Standing aboard a moving ship gradually becomes less like standing and more like participating in a very slow dance with something vastly larger than yourself. The dance has only one rule. Do not argue with the ocean. it leads, always. Somewhere high above, the rigging gives a long, soft sigh as the breeze changes direction. Hundreds of ropes tighten almost together, then relax. Each line sings a slightly different note. Together, they produce something almost musical. Not a melody exactly, more like the quiet tuning of an orchestra that has forgotten there will never be a concert. The sound drifts across the deck, disappears, returns again. Hours at sea are often measured less by clocks than by familiar noises. The groan of a beam, the flutter of loose canvas, the steady splash against the hull. A sailor eventually learns each sound by heart. Anything different immediately attracts attention. Anything familiar fades gently into the background until silence itself becomes impossible to imagine. You rest your hands lightly against the cool rail. The timber beneath your palms has been polished smooth by generations of watchkeepers who stood exactly where you now stand. Some watched peaceful nights like this one. Others watched gathering storms. Some searched desperately for unseen reefs. Some simply wondered how much longer remained before breakfast. History has a habit of preserving dramatic victories. It rarely pauses to appreciate the remarkable endurance required simply to remain awake between midnight and 4 o'clock. There is something quietly heroic about ordinary persistence, even when it feels profoundly uneventful, especially then. Your thoughts begin wandering, not wildly, just enough. You wonder how many stars remain hidden beyond those already visible. You wonder whether fish notice moonlight. You briefly consider whether the ropes overhead have names you could ever remember. They almost certainly do. There appear to be enough of them for every sailor aboard to accidentally pull the wrong one at least once. The ship, fortunately, seems forgiving. Mostly. The minutes stretch comfortably. The boredom never becomes unpleasant. Instead, it settles over everything like another layer of mist. The mind stops searching quite so eagerly for excitement. It accepts repetition. Wave, creak, breeze, moonlight, breath, wave, creak, breeze, moonlight, breath. The rhythm repeats until your thoughts begin moving at the same gentle pace as the sea itself. Even the officers speak less now. Their footsteps remain soft. Lanterns glow dimly beneath careful shades. No unnecessary light escapes into the darkness. Beyond the small circle of the ship, the world simply ceases to exist. There is no city, no road, no chimney smoke, no distant church bells. Only water extending beyond imagination. Only sky stretching without interruption. The silence of the open ocean is unlike silence anywhere else. It is never truly empty. It is filled with countless tiny sounds, so constant and so gentle that together they become something almost peaceful enough to forget. You stand quietly within that vastness. The hours continue unfolding one slow breath at a time. And somewhere, halfway through the long watch, the sea grows so calm and the night so impossibly still that it begins to feel as though the entire world has settled into sleep around you. The stillness settles so completely around the ship that time itself seems to drift with the tide. You remain at your post. The horizon has not changed, or perhaps it has, but so gradually that neither your eyes nor your thoughts feel any urgency to notice. The ocean continues its patient rhythm beneath the hull. The masts sway almost imperceptibly overhead. The ropes whisper, the timbers answer. Together, they produce a conversation that has likely remained unchanged for centuries. You begin to understand why sailors often claimed they could tell the hour simply by the feeling of the night. The first stretch of the watch carries a certain alertness. The final hour promises relief. But these middle hours, these belong to no one. Somewhere between 2 and 3:30 in the morning, the world becomes wonderfully uncertain. The body believes it should be asleep. The mind agrees wholeheartedly. The regulations, unfortunately, have submitted a different opinion. Maritime discipline possessed many admirable qualities. Compassion for interrupted sleep was not always among them. No matter how persuasive your yawn might be, the bell remained entirely unmoved. It would ring precisely when required. Not a moment sooner, certainly not later. The sea respected consistency. The Navy admired it almost as much. Around you, the other members of the watch continue their slow routines. No one rushes. There is little reason to. The ship moves steadily through calm water, and every sailor conserves energy the way careful travelers conserve candlelight. A few men pace quietly along the deck, not because they particularly wish to, simply because remaining motionless for too long allows sleep to approach with remarkable confidence. A dozen slow steps forward, a turn, a dozen slow steps back again. The pattern repeats until walking itself becomes another gentle rhythm of the ship. Others lean lightly against the rail for only a moment before straightening again. They know the danger. Comfort is persuasive. A wooden rail becomes surprisingly inviting after several hours awake. Given enough time, almost any horizontal or even slightly diagonal surface begins to resemble a perfectly respectable place for a nap. Human beings possess an extraordinary ability to imagine sleep in remarkably impractical locations. A coil of rope, a stack of sailcloth, an empty barrel. One suspects that if someone carefully polished a cannon, at least one exhausted sailor would eventually consider it reasonably comfortable. The cannon, fortunately, was rarely consulted. Nearby, one sailor quietly stretches his shoulders. Another rolls his neck with slow care. No one speaks of fatigue. There is almost no need. It has become a shared language. Every heavy blink receives immediate understanding. Every quiet yawn earns silent sympathy. The midnight watch creates a peculiar sort of friendship, not through dramatic adventures or heroic speeches, simply through mutual exhaustion. There is comfort in discovering that everyone else is equally determined not to fall asleep standing up. A small lantern glows near the galley hatch. Its light remains low, carefully shielded from the darkness beyond the ship. Presently, someone emerges carrying a battered kettle. Steam curls lazily into the cool air. Tea, or something closely related to tea. Historical descriptions vary. Some mention weak tea. Others describe beverages whose greatest accomplishment was being warm. After several hours of sea air, either was considered perfectly acceptable. A sailor hands you a simple tin cup. The metal feels pleasantly warm against your chilled fingers. You lift it slowly. The drink is mild, faintly bitter, comfortingly ordinary. It is not luxurious. No one expects luxury. It is simply warm, and at this particular hour, warmth qualifies as a remarkable achievement. You hold the cup for another moment before taking a second sip. Sometimes comfort arrives in very modest disguises. Soon, another familiar companion appears. Hardtack, a biscuit of legendary durability. Calling it bread would require considerable optimism. Calling it fresh would require abandoning objective reality altogether. It rests comfortably somewhere between food and construction material. Remarkably, it succeeds at being both nourishing and astonishingly resistant to change. Months may pass. The biscuit remains committed to its original form. Entire voyages unfold. The biscuit appears emotionally unaffected. Historians occasionally describe sailors tapping hardtack against the table before eating it, partly to remove crumbs, partly to encourage any determined insects to reconsider their accommodation. The insects, one imagines, had developed impressive resilience themselves. Life aboard ship encouraged adaptability in everyone, including the unintended passengers. You take a careful bite. There is a brief moment of negotiation. Your teeth present their proposal. The biscuit considers it thoughtfully. Eventually, after what feels like respectful discussion, a small piece breaks free. Victory. Modest. Earned. It softens considerably after another sip of warm tea. Someone discovered this technique centuries ago. The discovery probably improved morale more than several official naval reforms. Around you, the quiet routines continue. A lantern wick is trimmed. A loose line is secured. Someone checks the compass by its dimly glowing light. Another sailor pauses to listen. Not because he expects danger, because listening itself has become habit. Ships communicate continuously. The wind changes, the sails answer, the hull shifts, the rudder murmurs. Every sound carries information for those patient enough to notice. Then there are the regulations. Naval life possesses rules for nearly everything. How uniforms should be worn, how equipment should be stored, when hammocks must be lashed, where buckets belonged, which duties preceded others. Entire pages of instructions existed to prevent remarkably specific mistakes. One cannot help wondering which unfortunate sailor inspired certain regulations. Somewhere in history, perhaps, someone balanced a lantern in an exceptionally unfortunate place. A rule was written. Future generations inherited it. This is often how civilization advances. One carefully documented accident at a time. The officers continue their rounds. Their footsteps remain measured, professional, calm. Discipline aboard ship does not always arrive dramatically. More often, it appears quietly, through countless small habits repeated every day until they become as natural as breathing. A rope returned to its proper hook, a lantern properly shaded, a button fastened, a duty completed exactly when expected. The ship depends less upon extraordinary heroics than upon ordinary consistency. The ocean has little patience for forgotten details. You finish the last of the tea. The cup has cooled. Your hands have warmed. The breeze still carries its familiar mixture of salt and damp canvas, though now it feels slightly gentler than before. Perhaps the wind has eased, or perhaps you have simply become part of the night. The hours have a curious way of smoothing rough edges. Fatigue becomes less of a complaint and more of a companion. You stop resisting it. It walks quietly beside you. Even your thoughts grow slower now, not clouded, simply peaceful. The endless horizon no longer demands constant inspection. Your eyes move naturally across the water, recognizing the familiar dance of moonlight upon the waves. Shadow, silver, shadow again. Nothing unexpected, only the patient sea continuing exactly as it has for countless generations. Above, the stars seem subtly different, not brighter, not dimmer, merely shifted. Without fanfare, the heavens have continued their own slow watch while you attended yours. Time has been passing all along. You simply stopped measuring it. Far to the east, almost too delicate to notice at first, the darkness begins surrendering a single shade of its deep black. Not blue, not yet, only slightly less dark than before. The stars nearest the horizon lose the faintest trace of their brilliance. The sea reflects this change with quiet agreement. No bell announces it, no voice remarks upon it. Yet everyone aboard seems to sense the same thing. Night, faithful though it has been, has begun its slow journey toward morning. And somewhere beyond that gently brightening horizon, dawn is already making its patient way across the water. The eastern horizon continues its slow transformation. It is so gradual that if you looked away for only a moment, you might believe nothing had changed at all. The darkness has not disappeared. It has simply become gentler. The stars nearest the sea begin fading one by one, retreating with quiet dignity rather than dramatic farewell. Above, the higher constellations still linger, suspended over the masts like old companions reluctant to leave. The ocean notices first. Its surface, which only moments ago reflected silver moonlight, now carries the faintest suggestion of pale blue. Not daylight, only the promise that daylight is somewhere beyond the edge of the world, patiently making its way towards you. The ship continues onward with her familiar rhythm. Rise, pause, fall, pause. The movements have become so familiar that you scarcely feel them anymore. Your body has quietly accepted the sea's instructions. Perhaps this is one of the ocean's oldest lessons. Eventually, everything that resists begins to sway along with it. Around you, the watch remains calm. No one speaks unless necessary. The long hours have gently polished away every unnecessary word. Conversation seems almost extravagant now. A nod is enough, a glance, a quiet smile shared between two sailors who have survived yet another night of remaining thoroughly awake while the rest of the world enjoyed considerably better ideas. There is something deeply reassuring about shared routine. No grand celebration marks the end of difficult hours, only the comforting certainty that someone else will soon take your place. The human race has always depended upon this quiet exchange. One pair of tired hands replacing another, one weary set of footsteps following those that came before. It is not especially glamorous. It is simply how mornings arrive. A sailor near the bow quietly adjusts his coat. Another stretches his fingers against the chill. Someone suppresses what is clearly the fourth yawn in the last 10 minutes. Though, by this point, no one is pretending remarkable alertness. The officers, dignified as ever, appear equally pleased that the night has almost finished. History occasionally gives the impression that officers never became sleepy. History, while admirable in many respects, sometimes edits for dramatic effect. The sea is wonderfully democratic. Everyone grows tired eventually, even captains, especially the ones pretending otherwise. A faint breeze stirs the rigging. The ropes answer with one last soft chorus overhead. Wood sighs, canvas rustles, the rudder whispers beneath the stern. The ship remains alive with quiet sounds that have accompanied you from midnight until now. What once seemed mysterious has become familiar. The creaking beams, the fluttering lines, the gentle splash against the hull. Each noise now feels less like interruption and more like breathing. You realize, perhaps without quite meaning to, that the ship has become home. Only for a little while. Only until your watch ends. Still, for these few hours, this floating world of oak, rope, sailcloth, and lantern light has asked only one thing of you. Remain present, remain awake, watch the darkness. You have done exactly that. Then, at last, the bell, 4 clear strikes, measured, steady. Each one carries across the quiet sea before fading into the morning air. The sound is strangely satisfying, not because it is loud, because it means something. The midnight watch has ended. No cheering follows, no applause, no triumphant speeches about courage beneath the stars. Naval tradition appears to have concluded that exhaustion is best acknowledged with calm professionalism. This seems entirely appropriate. Fresh footsteps emerge from below. The next watch arrives with coats buttoned tightly and expressions that suggest they, too, would have preferred another hour in their hammocks. They receive quiet instructions, a few brief words, nothing elaborate. The horizon, the wind, the course, everything in order. Responsibility passes from one set of hands to another, almost invisibly, like a lantern being carefully passed across a dark room. You step away from the rail. Your boots feel heavier now, not unpleasantly, simply honestly. The deck beneath them continues its slow, familiar motion. You cross the planks one last time, passing coils of rope still glistening with dew. Lanterns burn lower than before. Their golden light seems softer now against the growing dawn. The companionway waits where you left it hours earlier. It is remarkable how welcoming a simple staircase can become, especially when it leads towards sleep. You place one hand upon the smooth wooden rail. The timber is cool beneath your fingers. Countless sailors have descended these same steps after countless watches, each carrying the same quiet relief. No medals awaited them, only rest. Sometimes that is reward enough. The ladder creaks softly beneath your weight as you descend. With every step, the sounds of the wind grow gentler. The sea becomes slightly more distant. The warm air below deck rises to meet you once again. It still carries its familiar collection of scents: salt, wool, tar, canvas, timber, a trace of tea lingering somewhere. The unmistakable perfume of life aboard a 19th century ship. Curiously, it no longer feels unusual. Perhaps the nose, like the sailor, simply learns acceptance. The hammocks hang exactly as before, rows upon rows of quiet white curves suspended between heavy beams. Some still sway gently from those already asleep. Others wait patiently for returning watchkeepers. Your own hammock swings almost imperceptibly, as though recognizing you before you arrive. You remove your coat. The wool is still faintly damp. The sea has remained wonderfully consistent in that regard. Some traditions never change. You loosen your boots. The relief is immediate. It has often been said that true happiness cannot be purchased. It may, however, occasionally arrive disguised as removing damp footwear after standing through 4 hours of cold night air. History should perhaps have devoted more attention to such victories. They are small. They are universal. You settle carefully into the hammock. It accepts your weight with practiced ease. There is no awkward negotiation this time, no uncertain balance. The gentle swing begins almost immediately. Back and forth, back and forth. The movement feels wonderfully familiar now. The ship rocks beneath you. The hammock answers. The two rhythms blend until you can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. Nearby, another sailor exhales a long, satisfied breath before sleep quietly claims him. Canvas rustles. Someone shifts beneath a blanket. A low murmur drifts briefly through the darkness before fading away again. Above, faint footsteps continue as the new watch settles into its own long conversation with the sea. You are no longer responsible for the horizon. Someone else now watches the waves. Someone else studies the sky. Someone else wonders whether every distant shadow deserves suspicion. For the next few precious hours, it is no longer your concern. Outside, dawn slowly unfolds across the ocean. The first pale light reaches the upper sails. The masts become silhouettes of warm grey instead of black. The endless sea brightens almost imperceptibly beneath the waking sky. You do not need to witness it. That is one of the quiet gifts earned by finishing the midnight watch. Morning may arrive without you. The ship continues sailing. The ocean continues breathing. The world continues turning with calm certainty. And you are finally free to rest. So allow your thoughts to drift as gently as the hammock beneath you. Let the soft creak of old timber become distant. Let the whisper of the waves grow quieter. Let the rhythm of the sea carry away the last remaining effort of staying awake. Imagine the ship gliding peacefully through calm water beneath the first light of dawn. Imagine the cool breeze above deck, the quiet sails, the endless horizon stretching gently into morning. There is nowhere else to be, nothing more to watch, nothing more to hold on to. The night has passed. Your watch is over. The sea is calm. The ship is steady. And at last, you may simply close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Feel the gentle sway carrying you farther into comfort and drift peacefully into sleep, while somewhere above, the first sunlight quietly greets another day upon the endless sea.